Debbie, you and I have been having such fun with this event. Now it's time to talk about your book and one of my favorites, First Pitch. So for the folks who are going to be watching this, I really want you to pay close attention. I'm using this book in my classes at Boston College Law School for my class on entrepreneurship. It is perfect in so many ways. So I'm delighted that Debbie and I will have a chance to talk about it. We've introduced Debbie already, but for those folks who are joining us for this segment, Debi Kleiman is the executive director of the Blank Center for Entrepreneurship at Babson College, our host. Debbie works with students, alumni, and faculty, as well as the broader entrepreneurial community, to accelerate the practice of entrepreneurship. Debbie's unique. Before coming to Babson, she was a managing director and executive VP at Havas Media in Boston. She's also had a variety of technology and marketing positions at various venture-backed and other companies, and she has spent many, many years as a mentor, advisor, and in some cases as an investor. Earlier in her career, she had field marketing leadership roles at Procter & Gamble, Welch's, Coca-Cola, all of the brand names. Just delighted that Debbie is both in her position helping entrepreneurs become successful, but also writing this book. So, First Pitch, I have, as I've told people in my column in the BBJ and in other places, First Pitch is a must-read. It is a really easy-to-follow framework. It has stories and best practices, analyzing lots and lots of pitches. So let's talk about it. Debbie, given the title, people would assume that this book, First Pitch, Winning Money, Mentors, and More for Your Startup, is just about pitching investors for money. It's not.
It's not.
Talk about that.
Yeah, it's funny. People have been like, oh, you wrote a book on pitching. And I'm like, well, yes and no. Because the reality is that it's about the entire pitching process, soup to nuts. And sure, the pitch deck and what you say in that pitch is important and is covered in depth in the book. But there's this whole other set of things that happen in the pitch process itself. And those things are really about communication and relationship building. And so what I really think I wrote is a book about communication and relationship building that allows you to make a great pitch and develop the relationships you need to build a startup. Because for most entrepreneurs, it's not just about getting money, as my subtitle indicates. It's also involving advisors, PR, influencers, early customers. All these folks can have a hand in your startup if your pitch is compelling enough to get them to care and to get them to lean in and want to help you.
That's one of the reasons that I thought this book was so appropriate and so foundational for entrepreneurs. As you and I talked about in the past, Debbie, so many entrepreneurs have this bias for action. They just want to do it. But you talk about in the book taking a step back even before you write the pitch deck and coming up with some basic essential tactics. What are some of those? I want people to read the book, but what are some of the essentials that you would convey to our entrepreneurs who are listening before they even start a pitch deck?
Well, I think one of the best things you can do as a entrepreneur before you start putting your pitch deck together is really to understand, like, what's your story? Storytelling plays a really huge role in effective pitches. And there's a reason why, because storytelling creates an emotional connection with your audience, which is really important because that will allow people to lean in and really want to be part of your journey. And storytelling also makes things memorable. And being memorable is also another objective of pitching because you want the person who heard your pitch to remember you and think about you long after the pitch is over so that they might end up helping you in some other way or find connections for you or provide some kind of help for you. And you also want them to tell their friends about you and to tell other people about you because that also creates this wonderful ripple effect of people talking about you. And certainly as a startup, an early stage startup getting underway, the more momentum you can have by people wanting to help and people caring about what happens to this startup and wanting to be involved, the better. So I talk a lot about storytelling, and it's interesting because in my background as a marketer, this is so true. As a marketer, we're trying to get people to persuade them to do something. We're trying to get them to change their behavior. And as a marketer for most of my career, that is how I've approached a lot of the things that I've done in terms of trying to make an emotional connection with my audience. It's based on those rules of marketing that I learned so well. Well, the same is true with pitching, right? You're trying to persuade people to give you something of value, whether it's their time or their money or their connections. So that same element of persuasion and getting them to lean in really applies here. And that's what storytelling does for you. So storytelling is just a wonderful way to engage people's brains. In fact, the brain science tells us that our brains love stories. They remember stories, and as we all know, storytelling has been around since the beginning of time, and people learn really well when you tell them stories. In fact, our brains are wired to take in stories. So lots of great reasons to make sure that you have a story to tell, and the story that you're going to tell is really your why about your company, and that in and of itself takes some deep thought and some insight into the problem you're trying to solve and why you, beyond anybody else in the world, can solve that problem best, and why you are the one that's going to make it happen right now. So there's a lot of soul searching, a lot of, also looking outward to sort of see what's happening in this moment in time that makes it the right time for your startup to happen, and then to develop sort of an origin story around that connects with your audience in an emotional way and gets them to feel something.
Debi, you've talked to so many Babson entrepreneurs and so many entrepreneurs in general. Are there one or two stories, and you talk about some of them in the book, that really got this right? In other words, for our entrepreneurs who are listening and thinking, well, what's my story? I'm just another software company. I'm another technology. There's got to be something. What are the kind of things that you would say to them, to entrepreneurs, to dig deeper? Tell a story that only you can tell. What are those kind of things, even if you're telling by example a couple that you thought really did a great job doing that?
Yeah, that's a great point, Larry, because 99% of the time when an entrepreneur sort of tells me their story or the story that they're working on for their pitch, they can always go deeper. They have not gone deep enough. I can always say to them, go deeper. Why, and ask them several times to just really dig into that initial pass that they've taken, because they've really stayed up here when they really need to dig in deep, and really make it emotional and make people feel something about it. So there are a couple pitches that really stand out to me that did a great job of this. My all-time favorite is probably Emily Levy, who's in the book. Her story's in the book, and her pitch, continues to resonate. I use it in my class all the time because it's such a great example of taking something that affected her personally. She has chronic Lyme disease and had to have a PICC line installed in her arm in order to get her treatments. And as a college freshman, she was walking around Babson with a PICC line in her arm, and she felt like she was a walking disease. And nobody wants to feel like that, especially not a teenage girl, off to college for the first time. And so she tells the story about feeling self-conscious about flirting with the cute hockey player in her 8 a.m. class. And, you don't have to be a teenage girl to understand that dynamic and to really feel something about moment. That. Right. And so she makes that problem come to life, that problem of feeling like a walking disease, that problem of feeling like a patient. And people who have chronic illnesses feel so badly about this. This takes away their confidence. It takes away their happiness. And her products it's adaptive wear. And so her products are about things you can wear to cover up, medical devices of all different kinds. And so her message and her thing that she's solving for is empowerment. It has nothing to do with, that it's an amazing, beautifully designed piece of fabric that you put on your arm. She is giving you empowerment, and she's selling you that confidence to be able to flirt with that hockey player in your 8 a.m. class, or whatever that version of that may be for someone. So I love her pitch because it is such a personal story about her and how she felt, but she taps into something that's so universal that everybody from anywhere can truly understand why this problem needs to be solved and why her solution to it is so unique and can only be delivered by her.
What a great example of digging deeper. Debi, what do you tell entrepreneurs who might have the opposite concern, which is, I have this allergy and I've solved it with this particular product, and therefore everyone should want to buy this product. In other words, taking it and forcing people to sort of empathize and understand that this needs to be more universal. How do you tell them to tell that story?
Well, I think a lot of it comes from putting yourself in the customer's shoes and really understanding how to talk about it in a way, not that you're familiar with necessarily, but in a way that, that can be drawn in a universal way or tap into a certain emotion that we know everybody feels, regardless of their situation or circumstance. So, I often tell my entrepreneurs at Babson to sort of think about an emotion that you're trying to get people to feel. Like, actually think about that emotion and build the story around that emotion versus building the story and hoping the emotion comes out of the other side. So starting with the emotion you want them to feel about the problem you're solving.
And Debbie, how would you advise students and entrepreneurs who say, that sounds great, Debbie, but I'm pitching to different audiences. So if I'm pitching to angels, I want them to be excited about the idea, and maybe they're familiar with the area. They used to sell shoes, and mine has a footwear product, versus I'm dealing with a very straight-laced group of Harvard MBAs like you, and they only care about ROI, rewards, does this fit our... How do you tell someone to adjust their story depending on an audience, or should they?
Well, I definitely think they should. The best pitches are very much tailored to their audience. Again, back to lessons from the marketing world, you have to know your audience. You have to know your target market really, really well. So when you're getting prepared to be up in front of someone or engage one-on-one with an investor or an advisor who might not, be the kind of person that you would imagine would want to hear a whole long drawn out story, you do have to adjust, and you do have to make very conscious effort to make sure you're connecting with that person in that moment. So you're going to have many pitches, and you're going to tailor them every single time, as you should. But if you think this person isn't, someone who's going to respond to an emotional thing, you're probably wrong, because everybody has emotions. But the idea here is that the emotional response or the emotional connection you're trying to make with your audience is generally connected to your unique value proposition as a company, in terms of your solution. So if your unique value proposition is the secret sauce, your magic that you do better than anyone else in the world, and it's tied very closely to your story and the emotional connection you're trying to make, then any type of investor is going to be interested in hearing that, because the unique value proposition is how you're going to win. And that is the thing that is going to make you, attractive to people to buy over anything else. So again, going back to your earlier question, there's a lot of work you need to do around how do you articulate your unique value proposition so it does connect to that emotion or that feeling that people are supposed to have when they hear about your product and they use your solution.
Debbie, what do you tell folks about length of a pitch? And I know the answer generally depends, but I have a dear friend who's a minister who advises you don't save any souls after the first 5 minutes. So what do you tell folks about that in terms of, I got this great story, Debbie, you just have to hear the whole thing. What do you tell those very excited entrepreneurs when the thought balloon over your head is, oh boy, not every audience is going to buy this, and you've got to get them. What do you tell them about length?
Yeah, well, you've got about 90 seconds for people to decide whether or not they want to hear more from you. So usually about that first 90 seconds, most people have decided already if they want to hear more about you. And if they don't, they've kind of tuned out after that. So that first bit is super important to engage people and to get that hook into them so that they'll continue to lean forward and listen in. But actually, the whole goal of giving a pitch is to not be giving a pitch. In other words, the whole point of a pitch is to get somebody engaged in a conversation with you, typically. Unless, of course, you're in a pitch competition. But if you're just giving your pitch to an investor or an advisor or someone you want to get involved in your business, ideally, it's going to move into a conversation where you can really dig into the details and follow the path that they want to go down, and really show them yourself as a thoughtful and intentional entrepreneur. So, if it's a question of like, if you do have the flexibility around time and how much you present, I usually say, like 8 to 10 minutes is probably more than enough for a formal pitch. But ideally, it's going to be 2 minutes and someone's going to ask you a question and interrupt you, and you're going to get started talking more in depth about the business and, put the pitch away.
Great question. So you're engaging. What a thoughtful way to think about it. So you're engaging in a conversation. Debbie, what do you tell folks about just that point that you made? I've got my story set. I've got my pitch set. Someone just interrupted me. How do you prepare those entrepreneurs? Do you just tell them, look, you're lucky if you get 90 seconds out before somebody starts to say, this is what I care about? And should the entrepreneur pivot or come back to? What do you advise them when they say, what do I do when I get interrupted?
Well, it's something you have to practice handling. You have to be good on your feet, and you don't get good on your feet by just magically waking up one day and you're good on your feet. It's something you really have to practice, and it's something that you really have to be challenged by in different situations so that it becomes very natural for you to switch gears if you have to. But what I generally say is if you're getting questions about something that you either can't answer or don't want to answer in that moment, find a way to answer a question you do want to answer in that moment and sort of move the conversation in the direction where you want to go. As the entrepreneur, you should try to keep control of the conversation. It's not that you're supposed to just, cede control to who you're speaking to in the sense that you don't get all the points out that you really want to get out. They may come out in a different order, but you still have a certain set of points you want to make. So make sure you're still controlling the conversation and you're still being intentional about how you're being perceived. But a lot of what goes into pitching, as I mentioned at the very beginning, is about this relationship building and this ability to connect with people, their motivations, their desires, their reasons for wanting to help you. And so a lot of that is just around trying to find that thing that really lights their fire and go there in the moment and be comfortable with that. But at the end of the day, they just want to know who you are, right? They want to see your authentic self. And the best way to show that is to be good on your feet and being open to listening to their feedback and their ideas and building on their ideas in the moment. And just really, again, engaging in a dialogue that's open and interesting, that shows you as an entrepreneur to not be defensive. It shows you to be coachable, which is something that a lot of early stage investors care about because they're going to be spending a lot of time helping you. And so they want to make sure that there's a good relationship between you to get involved. It's sort of like, some people describe it as a marriage because you end up spending so much time together. Right. You better feel like you really want to, sit next to this person on a 10-hour plane flight and still have a good time.
Great advice about active listening. Debbie, this all sounds so complicated. If I'm an entrepreneur and I say, I've got so much that I'm trying to do, how much tech do I need to know? Shouldn't I just hire someone to do this pitch for me?
Oh my gosh, never hire someone to do your pitch for you. Although I have heard of people offering that service, and I don't understand why that exists. Because again, at the end of the day, they're trying to get to know who you are, what you're all about, what you care about. A VC friend of mine says that he doesn't even let the entrepreneur pitch in the beginning of their meeting. He sits that entrepreneur down and he asks them about their life and where they come from and what they're all about, trying to understand their values and if they've got that it factor that can make their startup into a movement. They want to understand that before they get into the nuts and bolts of the startup. So it's really important that you're showing exactly who you are. You're not, putting on airs or being fake about anything or saying things that, are potentially untrue, and just being you and hoping that they can get excited and involved with what you care about too, by the way you present it and by the way that you tap into their emotions and desires and motivations.
And how much tech do I have to have? Debbie, if I'm not a person like you with extensive marketing background or really know how to do this, what do you tell entrepreneurs who just say, well, where do I start? I mean, certainly start with a good book. You've got some great tips in here, some references to some terrific resources. But how do they start if they've never really, in a meaningful way, put together a presentation before?
Yeah, well, the presentation or the deck itself is, one piece of it, and it has to be really good. Like, it can't be sloppy or have mistakes in it, because it's a reflection on you. Everything that you present about yourself and your company in those moments are a reflection of you. So if your pitch deck has errors, or it's sloppy, or it's too crowded full of text, they're going to think you're too crowded in your brain to be focused on the main goal. They're going to think you make mistakes. They're going to think you're messy. So the deck really needs to be a reflection of you and the business that you're trying to talk about. So it should be beautiful. It should have an aesthetic that reflects the brand that you're trying to build. If it's a modern brand, have a very modern looking deck. If it's a family brand, have something that really reflects a family image. So it all comes down to, fonts and images, and, being really deliberate about the way that you represent the business on paper, because that really reflects on you. And so you want that to do the talking in terms of, being aligned with who you are and what you're trying to say. But at the same time, the deck shouldn't say everything. So a presentation deck should have one idea per slide, not be crowded with text, and it should be there to support your talk track, not be your talk track.
I love that. Thank you so much for saying that, because how many meetings have you and I both been in where people are doing PowerPoints, they're reading you the slides. And the only thing you think as they're reading it is, there are 6 points on the slides. I can't wait till they get to number 6 so I can see what's on the next page. So how do you, when you tell entrepreneurs, that's such great advice. Say that again, Debbie, just to give some basic points about that PowerPoint, because it's so important for entrepreneurs who are thinking that. I want them to hear that, because you emphasize it in the book. It's such a great point. Just if you were saying to someone just generally, how many slides, how many points per slide? How do I do this, Debbie? How do I put together a slide deck that is entertaining? Do I embed files and do videos? What do you think?
Well, I don't think you want to get too fancy, because a lot of times your tech won't work in the moment, or something will go wrong. So you want it to be, able to run in a lot of different scenarios. So you don't want to, I generally don't do a demo in a first pitch. I would probably do a demo in a second meeting where we can really dive in together and look at the product. But I would show screenshots if your user experience is part of your unique value proposition. And you should be showing that. So the key is to make sure that you really understand your unique value proposition, and it's threaded throughout the deck. You should have about 10 to 12 slides for an investor pitch, and then an appendix. And in that appendix, you should have slides that support any questions you think you're going to get asked, because you didn't cover that information in the main
Great
deck.
point.
Right? So when someone asks you a question in the Q&A part, you can say, yes, I've got that in the appendix. Let me bring that up. So you bring up the slide that supports your answer, and then you go into your answer. But what should be true in all cases is that the slide doesn't have everything on it to explain your answer. It's about your answer in the moment, you saying it. The slide, again, is just there to support it, what you're saying. You can, however, create what's called the leave behind deck if you want, and that's a completely separate deck that you don't present. It has more text on it. It has more explanation on it that you can then give to the person you presented to, that they can share within their organization. Let's say they're angel network or something, and they want to share the deck widely after the meeting. So it has a little bit more text in it, but it's not meant to be presented. It's meant to sort of back up and remind people what you were talking about.
Great tips. And Debbie, we're all pitching now in different times. When you started to write this book, we actually got together in person for meetings. What are you telling entrepreneurs about adjusting to this virtual environment and virtual pitches, Zoom calls? What should they be thinking about? What should they be doing differently now that the world, or as long as this world is different?
Yeah, it's so funny, because I finished writing the book in February, and it went off to press and to get finished and to be ready for an April launch. And then the pandemic happened. And so had I finished the book in March, I probably would have had a chapter on how to pitch online. And as a result of that, I've written several articles about how to pitch online, because it is so important these days. A lot of what's in the book are universal rules about
Absolutely.
pitching. And so it's still totally, totally relevant. But pitching online comes with it a couple different things. You referenced tech earlier before. Tech becomes way more important in a pitch online because you've got to make sure you've got a good microphone, you've got a good camera, you might even have some lighting. It is not expensive to buy a ring light and put a ring light in front of you so that your face is being well lit while you're talking. Just little things to make you look good on camera can make a lot of difference into how the pitch is taken in and how it's perceived. I think the other thing that's really important is this idea of, having to project energy through that tiny little lens now. You're not getting the feedback from the audience like you normally would. You're not seeing people shake their head and nod in agreement, or you're not seeing them become distracted. So you have to assume that every few seconds, every 30 seconds or 40 seconds, you need to say or do something that's going to capture their attention back to the camera. So whether it's a hand gesture or a different type of emphasis and tone of voice, you have to assume that you need to keep bringing them back, getting them reinterested in what you're talking about, because you're not going to have those cues. And so you have to make assumptions around that. And it requires a lot more energy. You have to project more of yourself into the lens so that people can feel and care about that, about what you're saying. I counsel a lot of my entrepreneurs who are pitching online to actually create a deck that has more slides with less on it. So the idea is that when you're pitching online, you are changing the slide more often. Because again, that's another thing that might bring their eye back to your presentation if you switch the slide. So more slides, but less information than you would normally do in a pitch in person.
And Debbie, what do you say to teams that say, Debbie, ordinarily we would do this pitch together. She's in that space. I'm here. What's your advice for teams that might want to be collaborating on pitches and how that might be different virtually versus in person? Actually, I love your input on both of those. How do teams think about pitching together? And how do teams think about pitching together virtually?
I like to think that it should be one person pitching throughout the whole time. I don't like the handoff in the middle of a pitch. But what I do love is when the team is there and can be present for the Q&A part of the pitch. So they can, so what you would do as a team, if you're a team and you've got, a dynamite group of people you're working with and they're really part of your competitive advantage, this team that you have. And often advisors and mentors and investors care a ton about the team, probably more so than anything else, because they know the product's going to change, but the team hopefully will not. So they care a ton about the team. And so they want to see the team. And what I would use the team for is that Q&A section, and then practice with your team, whether it's online or in person, who takes what questions, figure out, if it's a marketing question, it's going to go to you, Larry. And if it's a P&L question, it's going to go to Dave. And if it's a question about how the product works, it's going to go to Mary. And so everybody kind of knows their role and which questions they field, so you don't talk over each other. And let their expertise shine in that Q&A section.
Yeah, and so important that at least they're there. And is that your advice if they're together virtually as well? You've got all these little heads in the Zoom window.
Yes, for sure. I think that it is the same thing. You want the team to shine, you want to feature the team, but it's really clunky to switch presenters in the middle. Hopefully you're not talking that long before it becomes a conversation anyway.
And any advice on, you talk a bit in the book about confronting bias. And I certainly in my career have seen it with some of my entrepreneurs from historically underrepresented groups. Female entrepreneurs have to do this differently. I don't want to give away the chapter because I think it's really thoughtful and well and just well positioned in the book. What do you advise, Debbie, about confronting bias? I'm a woman entrepreneur and I'm sitting in a room, a sea of folks who just do not look like me with their arms like this. Yeah. Talk about how do you adjust your pitch? How do you think about that when you're confronting implicit or outright bias?
Yeah, the pitch environment in the entrepreneurship world is unfortunately full of bias, and it's just a state of the business that it is that way. And I'd like to believe that most of it is unconscious, and people don't realize that they're doing it. But it's a fact, it's here. So as an underrepresented entrepreneur, whether you're a woman or a person of color, you really do need to be prepared for that and to be prepared to encounter it. So the first thing you need to do is obviously find people to pitch to that are actually going to be aware of that and be conscious of the biases that might exist and try to actively not, be biased in their opinion of you or their impression of you, and allow you to kind of show yourself to be the awesome entrepreneur that you are. But sometimes you just don't know, and it might happen in the middle, or it might happen in the Q&A section where somebody says something that is inherently biased, but they don't realize it. And what I tell entrepreneurs to do is employ a technique that I call spot it and switch it. And the idea is to get really good at spotting biased commentary or biased questions, and then switching the question to something that is about opportunity, about growth, about something that is bigger and more interesting and exciting than this very biased, risk-averse question they've just asked. So, if you're a mom and you have a business that is, really exciting, whether it's a tech business or a lingerie business, being a mom is an advantage. And so you need to show that when you get a question like, oh, well, you're a mom, can you really put all this energy and time into your business because you have a bunch of young kids? Well, actually, I see being a mom as an advantage because I get more done before 8 a.m. than most people get done all day.
Yeah.
And I have the ability and the strength to make my children well cared for and kept, and my business well cared for and kept. I'm perfectly capable. And I think that, it's actually an advantage because I'm bringing this perspective to the market that really needs it, for example. Or let's say you're building a company that's in a specialty marketplace, whether it's, products for skincare for Black women, and you're presenting to a bunch of white investors. The idea there would be to sort of show that your unique perspective and insight is hugely valuable, that you can see things they can't see. And so you start to talk about opportunity and market size and how you're going to win anytime you get something that sort of seems biased. So it kind of relates back to what I said before. If you get a question asked that you don't want to answer the question you do want to answer. And then, showcase that your difference is actually an advantage, whatever that difference may be.
Such terrific hard-earned wisdom. Folks, the book is First Pitch, Winning Money, Mentors, and More for Your Startup. I hope you'll get a copy and enjoy it. I'm sorry that we're out of time, but the good news is Debbie will be here. I will be here for the rest of our presentation, and hope you enjoy the book, and we'll pick up a copy soon. Thank you very much, Debbie.
Thanks, Larry. This has been so fun.